In this daily drop, we're going to talk about a full frame 35mm camera with an f2.8 lens and compare it to the selfie camera on an iPhone using cinematic mode. We're going to take a look at field of view and different apertures, so let's go. One of the things that I was really seriously considering was using an iPhone as the main camera. In fact, the first two episodes of the Daily Drop, the intro or sort of the overview, and then the next day's episode were using the iPhone. And then I've done some promos using it, but I'm not entirely sold. Now, the big thing for me is the noise in the shadows. That is definitely a problem with at least the iPhone 13's selfie camera. But the convenience of using an iPhone is enormous. It's the rest of the stuff. Now, when I shot the first two episodes, I used cinematic mode. And if you're not familiar with it, sometimes it's called portrait mode on an Android device. And essentially what it's doing is it's taking a teeny tiny little sensor inside of your smartphone, and it is using technology to essentially fake depth of field. So the first thing I wanted to do is figure out what the equivalent field of view, how much of the world did this camera see on the selfie camera compared to a full frame 35mm camera. And what I've done is I've done a bunch of tests in here, and what I found is in selfie mode, front-facing camera, you're looking at about a 24mm field of view for at least the iPhone 13. We'll see if that changes with other models. So now that we've established that, what I wanted to do was see how accurate the depth of field settings were on this device, on a smartphone, compared to an actual 35mm camera. All right, so now we have the iPhone 13's selfie or front-facing camera set to cinematic mode and f2.8. And we can see what that looks like. And I really want you to look at the out of focus areas. I'm not that concerned about the white balance right now. And it's still a little odd looking not to the lens. Well, I am looking to the lens, which is around there, but it's really hard to see exactly where it is behind all of that stuff. But you get the basic idea. So, you know, this is what it looks like at a 2.8, and I think now we should look at it with the 5D Mark III also at a 2.8 so we can see those out of focus areas. And we're looking at the depth of field properties of the shot and seeing if they are in fact looking similar or if they are different. Okay, so now we are at an f5.6, and you can see what that looks like in terms of these out of focus areas. And the difference is that there may or may not be compared to a full frame 35mm camera. And you can see what it looks like at a real f5.6 at 24mm, and then the iPhone 13's, at least on the selfie camera. Okay, and lastly, f11 on the iPhone 13. Take a look at those out of focus areas and what they look like. And the 5D Mark III at that ridiculously high ISO of 16,000. But what I really want you to pay attention to, again, is not the white balance, and the composition is essentially the same. It's really those out of focus areas. And what is cinematic mode doing when you're setting that camera to that particular aperture? And this is an f11, so we're pretty deep usually at an f11. More of the world is in focus. You're stopping down, you're closing down that aperture, and I think overall that concludes our test. So there you go. I'll step over here and we can wrap this thing up. The non-definitive test between a full-frame 35mm camera and a smartphone, and using that front-facing selfie camera, and seeing the differences, especially related to aperture settings when you're using these cinematic or portrait modes. This was the iPhone 13, hoping to do some tests with the 14 Pro and also at some point the 15. I'd still like to use this camera more in my production, so we'll see what happens. Don't forget to and I'll see you on the next episode of The Daily Drop.